my wife and I were just out on a walk, and it was getting close to evening, like the sun was going down, and I can see the exact spot on this trail that we were walking, and the sun kind of was shining through and hitting this tunnel that went underneath the road. And I was just being kind of a goofball, and I was just like forming my hands in different shapes because the little light was perfect, and I was making shadow puppets on the side of this like tunnel in the sun. And I was like, wouldn't it be cool if you could like form shadow puppets and then make those creatures like actually come to life? And it was like, I said that, and all of a sudden it was like a chain reaction in my brain. I was like, Shadowcasters, like all these ideas just started like rolling.
You're listening to Lemon's Listening Library. Discover the story behind the stories with unique and raw conversations from the people who make your favorite books a reality. All right, welcome to this episode of Lemon's Listening Library. I am Randie Lemons, fantasy author, or RL Rose to those of you in the romance community. Today we have a very exciting guest, and he's got nerdy topics that I can't wait to talk about with because you guys know how I am with that kind of stuff. But before we talk to him, as always, the boring housekeeping. Wah, wah. All right, so I want to remind all of the listeners to head over to our YouTube channel, comment on each episode that you listened to, tell us what you liked, what you had controversy topics on, whatever it is that you want to say on there. Just let us know, communicate with us. Also, head over to our podcast platforms. We are on all of them, and give us a review. These are two of the smallest ways that you can help the show that have the biggest impact. We also have some advertising spots available where we create commercials and broadcast them across all of our platforms, as well as give you the commercials to use however you see fit. If you'd like more information on this, please email us at lemonslisteninglibrary@gmail.com. There's not two ats. I just wrote that in a really weird way. And so now it's just at. One at. That's it. And we'll get you hooked up with that information. Lastly, go over to our social media platforms. Again, we are on all of them. Give us a like and share and follow. It would be greatly appreciated. Now, the moment we've all been waiting for, I'm done talking. We can move on to introducing our amazing guest today. Jared, will you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. And first off, thanks so much, Randie, for having me on. I've been really excited to have this conversation with you. But yeah, my name is Jared Woodcox, and I'm a recently self-published author, the creator of the Shadowcasters series. My first book came out in September of last year, 2024, and my second one's coming out really soon as well. I know we'll get into that. But yeah, a little bit about me. I grew up and live right now in Colorado. I was born and went to college in Utah, so kind of consider both Colorado and Utah my homes. I've done a lot of like different book events in those two states. I have a beautiful wife and a super fun 4-year-old son who is my world. When I'm not working or writing or playing with my son, which these days is basically all I do. And when I have a few bits of free time outside of that, I do like being outdoors. I love to run and hike. I'm a huge basketball fan, so love to play and watch basketball. And don't do it nearly as much as I used to, but I love to play guitar as well. So that's a little bit about me.
Fun. Yeah. So I want to know if you experienced this. So when my son was about 4 years old, he was a delayed talker. So that was kind of more when he was developing like his speech skills and whatnot. And some of the things that he would say, I would use in my book, like the words that he would make up. Like we played Pokemon all the time, Pokemon Go, and he didn't know the names to any of them. He would just make up names. And so one of the names he said was Cacawex, and I ended up taking that, and it's the name of my like world that my first book was in.
That's so cool. I love that. I haven't he is so funny. Like he has like all these made up things that he'll say, and he'll just he's been in this phase where he goes, "Dad, you're a Beanie Boy," and I don't know what that means, but he just keeps calling me it, and he'll pick up these random little phrases from little clips and shows. I don't know if your son is or in the past was into Tonys or at all, but my son's way into Tonys, and so he'll listen to these Tony stories and regurgitate stuff back to me. It just makes me laugh. But yeah, I feel like with him, I just make up so many stories to tell him. He's to the phase now where I think he likes me telling him a story more than reading out of a book. I just think he likes kind of the magic of it. So I'll do a lot of storytelling with him. And then just in general, he inspires me so much. And I'm looking for more and more ways to incorporate stuff from him into my stories as well, because he's just my world.
Yeah. And I think that's a really interesting concept too, because I feel like a lot of authors are like, I have to choose being a writer or being a parent. And it's there's actually this cool in-between space where you can just practice your writing skills and world building skills with your kids.
Yeah. Yeah. So we actually, to tell you a little bit, it's kind of funny. I've created this whole little world for him. We call it Hoppy and Zippy. And Hoppy is a frog and Zippy is a blue jay. And almost every day we'll do like, hey, let's do a little Hoppy Zippy story. And like sometimes they go off the rails because I'm just making them up on the fly. But like he loves them so much, and we've invented all these little characters together. And like some of them he will name, some of them he wants me to name, and like just gets really funny. And like just the other day, even we were at the airport and we're waiting for our luggage, and he's like, Dad, will you tell me a Hoppy Zippy story? So like it becomes our way to like kill time together and gives me a chance to like world build and create stuff with him too. It's a lot of fun.
So cute. I love that. You just took what my idea was and like went 10 times with it. You're like, yeah, I'm already there, man. That's amazing. We do something similar, but not that as unique as we will play like Dungeons and Dragons together with our kids. And so
Nice.
that's really fun. But oh my gosh, that's such a good idea. We've got a younger one that's 2, so he'll be getting to the age where he's like more interested in stories here pretty soon. I might have to try that on him.
Yeah, that's fun. That's really fun. Yeah, we're kind of getting to where like he likes to play games a little bit. Like you still kind of have to bend the rules and like make up what you're doing. But
Are
I
you
can't
kidding
wait
me?
for
I bend the
him.
rules with my kids and they're 11 and
Yeah,
13.
yeah. So I'm anxious for that day when we can play games even more fully.
Yeah, it's fun. It's definitely fun. I've told people a lot of times is I have more fun playing those games with my kids than adults because they still have this ability to like they're not worried about the restraints of the world or the rules or whatever, and they just like my daughter, she roped a ghoul, and I'm like, no adult would ever do that, and the consequences were so much funnier and so much more like she got into the world because of that action that she did, whereas adults are like, no, we gotta kill it. We gotta get away from it, you know? And
And I feel like there's probably like more of this, like there's like less of like this nervousness or worry to like do something silly. Whereas like with kids, like, no, let's just have fun with it. And like when you play those kind of games with adults, there's always kind of like this hesitance or reluctance to like dive all the way in. I have a really good friend, and this is years ago now, but during COVID, we were trying to play like D&D over Zoom together. And like I always felt like the one that was like kind of being the goofball and like not really messing things up, but kind of messing things up. It's like, can we do this? Like, let's just do something
yeah.
off the wall. And like it makes it so much more funny, I feel like. So
Oh,
hopefully
yeah.
he's listening. I know he'll get a chuckle out of that. So
I'm right there with you. I love the goofballs. I love the people who can just kinda say the thing, do the thing, and then, it just everyone being stone-faced and, like, playing by the rules all the time and whatnot. Like, it's fun, but it could be so much funner, guys.
yeah, totally with you.
So you mentioned that you did some guitar stuff. Now that was kind of where your first creative, that's the word I'm looking for. Your first creative outlet was in like songwriting, right?
Yeah. So like I always kind of joke, like I feel like in another universe, like I was like a songwriter and a musician because there's like a part of me that like I'll tell my wife sometimes like I miss that part of me that like played guitar all the time and was writing songs all the time. Cause I'd say like, so I didn't start super early, but I picked up guitar when I was 17 and just like fell in love with it. And like all throughout college and stuff, I was always playing and writing songs. And like when I pick up guitar and get back in that mode, like it's almost like this nostalgic. It's like I miss that person or I miss that part of me. Cause like
Oh,
I'm
that's
still
so
okay. Like,
cool.
yeah, I'm not horrible at the guitar by any means, but I'm not nearly as good as I used to be. But like, yeah, it was always like I found so much more fun in like writing my own songs and like creating my own things. And like people would be like, oh, can you play this song by this band? I was like, I could probably learn it, but like I don't know it. Like I just like to create my own stuff. And so yeah, that was definitely like an early one for me that I was always doing.
So you have okay, and I might be reading into this because it sounds really cool, and now it sounds like a book you need to write. You have nostalgia from a past life that you didn't live like in this life. That's really cool to think about like that.
Yeah. Yeah. That when you put it that way, like, yeah, it's kind of like, it's like a deep feeling. It's like hard to really put into words, but it's definitely a reality. It's a real thing that I feel. So yeah.
That's cool. Sounds like another book you need to write.
Yeah. Like an Inception-esque or something.
Yeah, yeah. Yep, and then figuring out your past life and, like, your family and all this other stuff that you had in this
Yeah.
past life, that would be really cool. I'd read it. Um,
That's cool.
you also did, fan fiction too, right?
Yeah, I did. So as a kid, I was just always writing and creating stories and coming up with stuff. And when I was in, it was either fifth or sixth grade, I started a fan fiction book of, I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's a series called Redwall, and it was literally my favorite as a kid. And it's about these like, what's the word? Is it anthropomorphic or like
Mm,
human like animals? It's like woodland
yeah.
creatures. And but it's like the mice and the rabbits and the squirrels are the good guys, and like the rats and the weasels and the ferrets are the bad guys. And it's I have them all on my shelf over here. I could show them to you if I could turn the camera. But I think there's like 19 or so in the series. But like I was obsessed with them. And so I started writing my own when I was in like sixth grade. And like, I got really far for a sixth grader. I got like 100 to 200 pages in.
Wow, that's
But
pretty cool.
I never finished it at that point. But as an adult, I like stumbled back across it and I was like, you know what? My 11-year-old self would want me to finish it. So I went through and like, I rewrote some stuff. I kept some of the like little kid charm in it from before, but I went through and rewrote the whole thing. And then it was kind of like, well, what do I do with this? Like, I've put years into this now. And unfortunately, I did get in touch with like the publisher, and like they said the family's not letting anybody like publish any fan fiction or go any direction with that. So I know we'll get into this, but that kind of spurred me like, I want to do my own thing now. Cause like I did Redwall, I've done some like Star Wars fan fiction, some other little things there. But yeah, that was kind of where I kind of got some practice with writing stories, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really important thing that I don't think a lot of people realize. Like when you decide to write a book, jumping into like the first book that is like your soul book and that you want everyone to read and that you're like, this is going to be the big one. That's not always necessarily the best idea because you do, like you said, you need the practice with just playing around with it. What does it look like? How do I actually write a whole book and the time commitment to that? So I think that fan fiction is such a great way to flex your skills in this area before diving into like your first real book.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's like the nice thing about it is, as I'm sure you can relate to, Randy, like one of the hardest parts of writing your own book is the world building aspect. And so when you're doing fan fiction, you kind of have that crutch of like, okay, a lot of the world building is done for me. I can focus on like, let's just create a cool story and get accustomed to it. Cause like I've talked about this a lot with like friends and family that, I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and I've probably read more like Star Wars novels than just about like any other. Like I love them. And I've always thought that like, man, those authors kind of have a unique advantage because they can just write lightsaber, they can write Star Destroyer, they can write Jedi. They don't have to explain what those are because people, if they're reading the book, they already know what those are. But when
Yeah.
you're writing your own book and you're creating your own world, and like with my first book, like that was such the challenge of like, how do I build this world for the reader without just like info dumping on them? How to like weave things in little by little. And like, I've gotten honestly so much better at it, even from the time I finished my first book. Like if I could do it all over again, there's probably things I'd change. But yeah, just that aspect of like world building is so unique. And when you're doing your own book, you have to build something that no one's ever heard of. So like in my book, for example, there's things called caster beams, and obviously there's shadow creatures and there's shadow symbols. And like these are things that nobody knew about. They didn't exist until I started writing my book. So I've had to figure out a way to describe those in a way that doesn't lose the reader completely. So yeah, it's fun and challenging, but I agree with you. Like practicing with an already established world is a great way to get started.
Yeah. And you're so right too on the safety net of being able to say things for like, Harry Potter. If you were to write a fan fiction of Harry Potter, if you were to say wizards or, the schools, Hogwarts, things like that, the magic, the potions, all this stuff, they already know the rules of the world. They already know, that there's the bad wizards, the evil wizards, stuff like that. They have a good idea. It's the same thing with any fan fiction. If you and you're also, that's what you're writing to, is the fans of those worlds. You're not writing for people who've never read those. But just like you said, going into and building your own world. Oh my gosh, I don't know what your documents look like, but I have documents for like my government. I have documents for my characters. I have documents for how things tie into each other in different areas. Like it is so tedious, but I absolutely love doing that. Like I think I have 4 outlines for stories. And I'm just like I when I get new ideas, I will just create the outline and then let it sit.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and like it's funny because like I recognize like I feel like one of my weaknesses as a writer is sometimes I can fall into the habit of like over explaining or like saying too much, so to speak. And even in my final products, like I know that I'm a little bit verbose sometimes. It's funny though because like even with how verbose like my books can be, um, like it's just the tip of the iceberg. Like you should see how much I've thought out and planned. And like I have backstory stuff and like governmental stuff and things that will probably never see the light of day. Like maybe,
No,
maybe
wait
yeah,
until you get that fan base like J.R.R. Tolkien, and they've got like
yeah,
the
I
the
hope so.
Bible for his books.
Yeah, that's what I was going to joke. Like maybe 20 years down the road, there'll be some like anthropology or like some like, what's it called? Like that has all the different things behind the scenes. But still, my point is like, yeah, there's so much that you plan that like helps you craft a character that the audience sees, but that for the most part, like doesn't see the light of the day in the books themselves. So like, I totally hear you. And like, yeah, I have docs all over the place. I've actually been doing a project since I just finished book 2 and I'm working on book 3, but I'm kind of going through a project right now where I have so many different like plans and notes and ideas. and I'm trying to consolidate those into one spot because I just feel like I've gotten too scattered almost. And like, I have so many good ideas. I don't want to forget them. I want to make them easier to find. So that's kind of like a project I've
Can
been
I give
doing.
you a
Like what?
tip? Can I give you
Yeah,
a
please,
suggestion? So
please.
there's a there's a program called Obsidian,
Okay.
and you can open up new files, new documents to where you keep it all in this one little vault is what they're called.
Okay.
And then there's brackets in there. You can use brackets to like link names to different files. So like if you have a character who is the president of your world, you can bracket that his name to also your government, where it explains his role and his, how the government works and stuff like that. Obsidian, oh my gosh, I love Obsidian so much. I actually found it for my D&D when I was DMing campaigns on like building out my worlds, and I was like, why am I not using this for my book?
That's cool. So I've been using one that I stumbled across a little bit ago called Plotter, Plottr. But I'll have to check out Obsidian too. That sounds really cool.
Yeah, it's a lifesaver. I have ADHD and I squirrel, and like I said, I'll jump into other outlines, and it has made my process just so much cleaner in
Cool.
writing my books.
Cool. Well, thank you for the tip. That's fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, so we were talking about like how fan fictions and stuff kind of gives you a crutch for the world, but like I also I use this personally myself. I will use people in my life for the characters. So then I also have an outline and I don't have to necessarily recreate this whole character. Do you do that at all for your characters, or like inspired from other worlds that you like or other characters from other worlds?
Yeah, good question. I'd say like maybe a touch of people like in the real world. Like there'll be things like scattered in of like either family or friends I'm super close to. I'd even say like maybe the biggest one from like the real world is like two of the main characters in my book are feel like kind of like are two different reflections of myself. Like one is kind of more like my confident side, one is more kind of like my self-doubt side that are reflected in some of the main characters. But definitely draw inspiration from like characters in other things that I really love. Like for example, like some of my biggest inspirations for Shadowcasters, one of them is Avatar: The Last Airbender. And so the main heroine in my series draws a lot of inspiration from Katara, as well as from a video game character. If you've heard of Final Fantasy VII is like one of my favorite things growing up. And so Tifa
Trying
is
to get
kind
the
of
golden
inspiration.
chocobos was the best.
Oh yeah, yeah. And then like Full Metal Alchemist is another. It's a show that was a big inspiration for me. There's characters in my book, and it was funny. I was actually visiting my sister-in-law not too long ago, and she was like, this character in my book, her name is Wendy Bonafont, and she's like, with Bonafont, I'm getting some serious Madame Umbridge vibes, and I was like, that was exactly my inspiration for her was Madame Umbridge. So like, yeah, like
Yeah.
definitely from like things that I really love. I mentioned Avatar, Full Metal Alchemist, Harry Potter. I would say like Star Wars is one. Final Fantasy VII, I mentioned, like there'll be certain like characters from those that I really like connected to, either from a protagonist or antagonist standpoint. And I've certainly had them be inspirations for some of the people in my book.
Love that. I think that I love that that's something I hear a lot of authors talk about, because my first book that I wrote, I took all of my favorite things from my different worlds and I was like, can I just cram them all into one world? And that's exactly what I did. It was awesome. But you're passionate about it, right? I think that being
Yeah.
passionate about something and then writing about that passion and then putting your own twist on it, your own spin on it, your own way that it fits into your world, that's some of the best writing, and some of the best books out there are because they're inspired by other books that they loved.
Yeah. Well, like I always joke too, like, yes, like, do I want Shadowcasters to take off and for people to like really, really love it? Like, absolutely I do. But also like, I feel like not only am I the author, but I'm like the biggest fan of this story because it's all of like little bits and pieces of all my favorite universes put into one. And so it's like, if nothing else, like I'm writing it because I enjoy it and I want to make this story come to life and I want to be able to look back and enjoy what has come together. So it's like, yeah, I'm the author, but I'm also like the biggest fan at the same
I'm
time.
writing this for me. I actually don't care if any of you guys read this. But please read it because I need to also pay
Yeah, but
myself.
please, yeah, actually, we got to play a little bit, but yeah. Oh man.
So you talked about like the inspiration from all of these different things. What was it that was like, okay, I want to now put all this together? I know you talked a little bit about, so I guess that was kind of what it was your fan fiction, and then now going into the decision of I want to do my own book, right?
So that was a big part of it. I'd say like another thing that really sparked me, and it's funny because it's such a vivid recollection in my mind, even though it's something so small and minor. But kind of the backdrop to it was about 7 years ago now. I went through a pretty substantial career change. And it was a pretty hard moment in my life because like my previous career had turned out to be not what I hoped it to be. And the new one I was jumping into, I was pretty like reluctant and unsure about. And so it was a time of like a lot of like reflection and quite frankly, like a lot of discouragement. And I remember like with that backdrop, and then kind of as a side note, like during that time, I was watching a lot of Full Metal Alchemist was the one I was kind of into at the time. But then one evening, my wife and I were just out on a walk, and it was getting close to evening, like the sun was going down, and I can see the exact spot on this trail that we were walking, and the sun kind of was shining through and hitting this tunnel that went underneath the road. And I was just being kind of a goofball, and I was like forming my hands in different shapes because this little light was perfect. And I was making shadow puppets on the side of this like tunnel in the sun. And I was like, wouldn't it be cool if you could like form shadow puppets and then make those creatures like actually come to life? And it was like, I said that, and all of a sudden it was like a chain reaction in my brain. I was like, Shadowcasters, like all these ideas just started like rolling. And like, I went home that night and just started writing down like these ideas just like were flowing through me. It was so cool. And like from something so stupid of me just goofing around forming shadow puppets, all of a sudden I got this idea for Shadowcasters. And like, you know, I'd done the fan fiction. I had started some other like books in the past, but this is the one where, again, going back to that backdrop of me being kind of discouraged with career and like where things were, it was like, I want to do something cool. I want to create something that's my own. And so I think just all those pieces coming together, and for some reason, a shadow puppet on the side of a wall on a walk is what made the light bulb turn on. That's where it really got the spark and where I started just feeling like, hey, this is the story I have to tell and I have to create.
Now, what was wife's reactions? Like, was she like getting into it with you, or was she like, did you come to her later and like, hey, I have this story idea? I'm interested to see what her role was in it.
Sure. Yeah. I think at first it was kind of like, you know, maybe a little bit of like, okay, like, yeah, it's an interesting idea, but like, where are you going with this? But I think that she's just seen like the work and the thought I've put in it, like over the years, and has come to be like super supportive of it. And then like, she has become also like my soundboard and like my brainstorm. And like, it's pretty cool. Like, for example, I have like I have my main series obviously, but I also wrote like it's called a prequel short story. I use it as what I call like a reader magnet. To like get people to join my mailing list. But I'm like so proud of how it turned out. It's called Devotions Dawn, and it's a prequel. It takes place several years before my series. And I was just really stuck on like a certain thing I wanted to have happen in that book. And so I was like brainstorming with my wife. I was like, I want this to happen. I want these things to come together. And like, it's so cool because like, I feel like now like I can talk through things with her, and whether she has like the suggestion or whether just by me bouncing it off her, like the, you know, the synapses or whatever click in my brain, like I get things to come together. So yeah, like I feel like at first she was kind of just like, okay, we'll see what comes of this. But like, she's seen how passionate I am about it. And like, I mean, it's been so many years in the making. It's been one of those things that I joke, like, you don't ever see a flower grow, but like give it time and all of a sudden it's something there and beautiful. And like a lot of times with Shadowcasters, it's felt like such painstaking, slow progress. It's like, man, maybe I edited a page like in 2 hours. Like, but you know, it's those little tiny building blocks that make that flower or that hopefully one day a tree grow. So yeah, she's seen that little work little by little and been super supportive.
I love that. My husband's very similar to being my sounding board, whether he wants to or not.
Yeah, yeah, I can relate to that too. I'm
Yeah,
sure
yeah.
sometimes she's like, "Can you get your head out of like Shadowcasters for once?" I'm like, "Oh, I can try," but
Yeah. Yeah. I think
um,
he's realized that the more he like doesn't engage in the conversation, the longer it's going to take to get through the conversation. So now he's just like, "All right, let's do this. I know you're in this mood, so let's just okay, yes, I'm focused."
that's funny. That's really funny.
Uh, Now you submitted your book to different agents, to different things like that. Oh wait, no, did you? Actually, I don't know. I was reading that and I think I just made that up in my head. Did you submit it? Did you query it?
So good question. So I think maybe what I was talking through there is that when I was trying to find an editor, I was sending like my sample out to quite a few different editors, and like that was when I was like, okay, like I don't know really what I'm doing. I've finished. I put that in air quotes. I've finished my book. I'm ready to get it to an editor and like start making this actually happen. And the feedback I got from like every single editor was like, hey, like this story seems really compelling. A lot of them said something along the lines of like, hey, it's cool because it's unique enough, but it's also like familiar enough for people that it should be really, really exciting. But every single one of them was like, but you've written this in kind of an outdated point of view. You've written it in what we call, omniscient narrator versus like a third person intimate where it's told from the character's points of view. And that was feedback I got like across the board. And like, I can't even tell you, Randy, it was like, here I thought I had done something really cool and like finished this book and my heart just sank. It was like, oh, wow, like I need to really go back and not to the drawing board per se, but I'm gonna have to go through and recraft this whole thing. And like, that's probably the closest I came to like throwing in the towel and be like, is this really worth all the time and effort? But I went through, it took me over a year, but went through and rewrote the whole book to more of that third person intimate point of view. And like, it's clicked for me now. Like, I think it was just, I was basing it off of the way I would write when I was younger and not being like up to speed with what I should have been. And one of my favorite authors of all time, his name is Timothy Zahn. And I feel like he's the master of third person intimate writing. Like, he's just so good at it. So like, it was kind of serendipitous. I was reading some of his books at the time. So I feel like he influenced a lot of how I fixed my book and made it better. But yeah, so just to backtrack a little bit, I am self-published. So I am an independent author. So I've toyed with the idea of like submitting to publishers or agents. For now, I'm kind of just going the independent route, and I have a really awesome editor that I've loved working with so far. And yeah, that's where I'm at this point.
Yeah, yeah, that decision to go traditional, like it's like this, idea that sounds really great, but then also giving up a lot of your creativity, control and things like that. And also, you're still going to do a lot of the work that you're doing now. Like you're still going to be marketing yourself. You're still going to be doing a lot of the front end labor yourself. And so I get that. I'm in the same boat as you of like, do I want to submit to I don't know, we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like right now it's like, again, like obviously all of us, like we hope our series takes off and becomes like really awesome. And like, I feel like for now I'm in this point where it's like, I just have all these like cool stories and stuff in my brain and in my mind, in my heart. And like, I want to get them out there in the best way that I can and really just get practice of exploring the world of writing, exploring the world of marketing books, exploring the world of selling books. And then like, get my arms around that and get that experience. And if Shadowcasters takes off, great. If it doesn't, like I know I've learned a bunch of amazing things along the way and I can learn from those lessons. Like I feel like that's really where I'm at right now.
Yeah, yeah. And then, going from that, I think one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is a lot of the big, besides a couple of the few who like did one big and it hit, but a lot of the big name authors, they didn't go big until they were like in 10th book. They had a backlist. So that way, whenever that book blew up, all of their other books also started getting consumed that they had been writing as well.
For
And
sure.
I listen to Brandon Sanderson's lectures all the time where he's like, you need a backlog. Like, you need to write. That is your goal. You shouldn't even be marketing your books really until you have at least, 6, 7 to 10 books out. And I'm like, okay, but I still need to market, right? Like, I still need to put myself out
Yeah.
there, right?
Yeah, well, and it's hard because it's like, well, how do I have the means? And because it's like, it's not, as you know, like it's not cheap to get a book out there. Like if you want to like have art, if you want to have editing, if you want to have, even some social media presence, things like that, like it takes an investment. And so it's like, man, how far in the hole do I have to get 6, 7 books out before things start turning around? Like, I know you understand that, but yeah, I was hearing him say something like, if you've only written one book, like your job is not to sell books, your job is to write more books. And so like,
Yep. Yeah.
that's something I try to take to heart as well. Is it's like, okay, look, I'm planting a seed right now. The first book's kind of that seed. Like, let's just keep writing more and more books and establishing myself as this creator of this series that's not just like a one and done. And yeah, hoping that it really takes off from there.
Yeah, that's another thing too that I didn't realize, and I should have. I'm a reader as well, but like building that trust with your readers of like you can complete a series, because
Yeah,
a lot of
for sure.
people will start reading a book and it's like one series and then they don't write the rest. And so that's another big thing too, is like especially if you're writing a series, completing the series so that way you build that trust with your readers.
Well, and like I even think, and honestly, I'm kind of behind the times sometimes too. Like, admittedly, I'm usually the one that's like late to the party of like big books or big
Hey
things
guys.
like that. But for example, like so actually just last night, this is kind of good timing. Last night I just finished reading the third book in the Red Rising series, and so I've really enjoyed the 3 books I've read so far. But like I honestly just barely heard about those, like I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, and I was like, oh, these must be relatively new. And like I looked up, like he wrote his first one, like I don't remember what it was, but it's like, was it, I want to say like 2015 or something. Like I'm
Yeah.
probably wrong on that, but like it was a while back. And so like that's my thing too, is like sometimes it just takes a while for things to catch on, or like people, like they've written these books and it takes them 10 years down the road for them to get big. And like I was seeing something from Brandon Sanderson as well, and I think he said something along the lines of like one of his books he wrote it like 18 years ago before it finally hit the USA Today top sellers list. And it's like,
Yeah.
wow, like even someone
Yeah.
as like renowned as him, like his first book took 18 years to make that list. And it like, not all of us are going to be that ever. Like, I understand that, but like, it gives me hope that it's like, okay, like it's okay that these things can and should take time. Like, keep putting in the work, like keep creating cool stories, keep being passionate about them. And like, I believe in it so much. And like, other people are going to catch that passion and feel that as well as they dive in. And so like be patient with yourself, give yourself some grace and keep going. Like I try to tell myself that so much.
Yes. In all the hats that we have to wear as indie authors especially, you're going to burn yourself out if especially if you're on your first book where you're still developing the discipline to write a story. You're still developing, your process of writing a story, so you can get derailed and burnt out to where you don't even continue writing so easily. So don't beat yourself up if you haven't posted a video on Facebook ever or whatever social media you use every single day at 3 o'clock, and it's just not getting over 200 views. It's okay. You need to write the stories. That's what you're here for. Let's do that.
Yeah. 100%.
Yep, yep. And developing your own personal craft. Your process is probably completely different than mine, and my process is probably completely different from 10 other authors that we talk about, and that's okay. Like, I don't think people realize that you don't have to write like Brandon Sanderson. You don't have to write like Rebecca Yarros. Like, just do your thing that feels good for you and learn and always continue to grow, but develop your own craft.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's like, I feel like there's some, like, it's like, there's a fine balance between like, you want to follow, like if there's proven paths to success, like sure, follow those. But also like some of the most successful people have deviated and done their own things, have been really successful. And so like, there's like things that I do in my series that I feel like are distinct to it that I'm like, yeah, maybe this is a little unorthodox, but like I'm passionate about it and how it's going to all come together in the end. So I'm going to stick to that, right? Like you have to be willing to take a little bit of a risk, I think.
Yeah. And I love what you said about you being passionate about your story, right? Like you've almost got enough passion for everybody. Like we've got this. I'm the same way. I'm like, I can picture, whenever I'm giving my speeches to my people who are like interested in how I write, or, picking out the actors who are gonna show in my characters when it turns into a movie. And
Yes.
so like I am the biggest fan of my book for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have to be like, I don't know how else you keep going with it unless you're just like, I feel like these characters are almost like my friends. Like that sounds weird, but like I can see myself sitting around hanging out with them and like
Yeah.
having these deep conversations with them. Like you've got to have that passion for it to keep going.
Well, we know them on such an intimate level too. Like the characters that we introduce to everyone, there is an aspect of we know their backstory, we know their reason why they're behaving the way they are. So when they're acting like dicks or jerks or whatever, we're like, oh, it's the trauma that you're going through. I get it. You have a little
Yeah.
bit more grace for your characters too.
Yep. Yeah. And like we know, like in some ways, we probably know them better than they do because we know where they're headed. We know where they're going to end up. Like, you know what I mean? It's like it's weird. It's almost like being like the god of the world you're creating in your book because like you know where they're going to end up and stuff too. So yeah, it's crazy. And it's like, I don't want to spoil anything in my series, but because I have kind of a side note, but it's related. Like my brother, especially, but my whole family would always joke when growing up that like my favorite characters in movies and shows and books always die. It's like if it's someone that I've just clung to and I love that character, even if it's someone like random, they
Yeah.
will die. And like
Yeah.
it got so ridiculous that like if you've seen episode 2 of Star Wars Attack of the Clones, I remember sitting in the movie theater next to my brother and like I don't know why this random Jedi pops up that kind of looked dinosaurish and I was like obsessed with dinosaurs as a kid. I nudged my brother and whispered to him, "That one was so cool. That one's my favorite Jedi." And I kid you not, the very next scene you see him, he dies. I was like, why did I say anything? I should have kept my mouth shut. So, but anyway, what's
We don't name
funny
our
is like,
goldfish either, right?
yeah, exactly, exactly. But like, I feel like that carries over into my books. And again, that's why I'm like, people ask me like, who's one of your favorite characters? And like, I don't like to tell people because knowing my track record, like that person's probably not going to make it. Like if they're my favorite person, like, anyway, so it's just funny because like I have plans for some characters and like, I've always loved side characters and don't get me wrong, my main character is awesome, but for whatever reason, I've always had a soft spot in movie shows for kind of like the side character that's like important, but maybe does this, that, or the other. And so like, I think you'll see in the Shadowcasters series, like my main characters, like obviously they drive the story forward. They're awesome and I love them, but I really want my side characters to take a big role as well, which means if I love some of them, they might be in trouble. So
Yeah,
that's how it
right.
works.
I love
So
that you said that because, like, as I was filling out like my character's backstory and everything, I feel like one of my side characters has a more in depth and like their backstory than my main character. Like, it's I do kind of have a soft spot more for one of my side characters than I do my main character, and that's so funny. Me and my husband were talking about it, and we were talking about how there's not a lot of shows or worlds that we're like we love the main character more than like another character. Like it's always another side character that we love more than the main character.
yeah, 100%.
Oh, I love that. But that just goes to show everyone's own unique personality putting into their characters too. I enjoy it so much reading and getting to know all these characters. Um, you mentioned that you've got a kid, you've got the wife, you've also got a full-time job. And so how are you managing everything with what's going on in Jared's world?
Yeah, for sure. And like when I kind of tell people about it, like I think sometimes they think that I'm nuts, but I figure out a way to juggle it. I feel like I do all right. I mean, in some way, something has to give. A lot of times it's sleep. Like I feel like a lot of times it's like, work all during the day and then, spend time with my wife, play with my son in the evening. Then once everybody's asleep, like that's when I roll up the sleeves and get working on writing. And so like that's one bit of it. The other piece too is like, and like, don't get me wrong, like I love to like watch shows too, or like play video games, but like, feel like for a lot of people, like their escape or their unwind time or their decompress time is like, oh, let's watch a movie or let's watch a show or let's play a video game. And like, while I like those things too, like anymore, like for me, like writing is almost like that escape. Like, yes, I'm working towards like creating a series and like you kind of say it's a side gig or it's a job to some degree or it's a career I'm pursuing. And like things are all true. But also like I just enjoy it. Like if you were like, hey Jared, do you want to watch like a show or do you want to go and write your book for 30 minutes? Like I probably pick writing my book and not just out of an obligation to do it. Like I love it. Like I feel like it's like I get to be the creator of my own show, so to speak. I get to like create this own world. And so like that's a big piece of it too, is like I feel like I spend a lot of time, obviously doing my full-time job, spend time with family. And then when I have free time, so to speak, I enjoy putting it towards the book writing. So that's one way that I balance it. And then like I think too, like just finding ways to be creative with like, okay, I need to like take a weekend and spend like a couple hours working on the book. Like you can find times to do it. You just have to be pretty like intentional about it, I think. So
Yeah. Yeah, I like the intentional. That is definitely a piece that when you go from it being a hobby to I want this to be real, like I even started tracking how much I can write in a session. And in business 101, it's like if you want to see it grow, you have to chart it, you have to track it, you have to see what the numbers are. And that's something that I've been doing personally. But I like what you said about, the it's your hobby. Or not your hobby. It's the thing that you're excited about going and doing, because I think that that really shows you that this is something you can do long term, and this is your thing. And I think a lot of if you have that in writing, that is beautiful. People look for that their entire lives for that passion, that thing that you could probably do for years and years and years and not get burnt out on. I'm sure you'll have days or weeks or whatever, but it's a thing
sure.
that keeps
Yeah.
calling you back.
Yeah. And a couple of thoughts come to mind on that is like, it's frankly, like I wish I didn't have to work a 9 to 5, but like right now I'm able to like look at the 9 to 5, like, okay, this is what's funding my book dream right now. Like I have to do this because like I need to be able to continue to support a family, take care of us all while also pursuing this dream of becoming an author. And like, yeah, absolutely. Like I hope one day that like being the writer can be is the career and be the full-time job. But I try to look at this, maybe this is the transition phase of like going from one to the other, so to speak. But also along those lines, like there's a movie and it's not very well known. It's actually it's an Indian movie. It's a Bollywood movie, but it's one of my favorites of all time. I recommend it to anybody listening. It's called Three Idiots, which sounds like a funny name, but like it's actually a really, really deep movie. They're considered idiots in quotes because like essentially they are kind of challenging the norms. It's not like it has funny parts, but it's not like just a straight up comedy. But anyway, there's a line in that movie that just always sticks with me where the main character says, make your passion your profession, then work becomes play. And like that's how I feel about writing. It's like it's like even the things that like are tedious, right? Like rewriting and editing like is tedious. But because what you're working toward, that end state, is something you're so passionate about and so excited about, it becomes what I call like a labor of love. It makes even the hard parts enjoyable because you know what you're working towards. So it's like, yeah, even the parts that suck, or even dealing with writer's block, or even when it's like, I can't get this chapter to connect with the ending. Like, what am I doing wrong? Like, you don't get discouraged or depressed as much as you would with maybe something you like hate, like a 9 to 5 job. Um,
Yeah.
Whereas it's like it becomes more of like a puzzle that you want to solve it, you want to fix it because it is that labor of love.
Yeah. And you're so passionate. It's almost like having, a loved one. And if you want them to be healthy, you have to eat correctly. You have to do all these things that aren't always fun. You have to exercise. It's the same thing with your book. If you want your book to be a healthy book, essentially, you have to do the editing, you have to do the revisions, you have to get it to beta readers and have the hard critiquing and whatnot. I love the way that you said that. That makes a lot of sense of like your book deserves this. If you're passionate enough about this story, then it deserves the editing. It deserves the time and effort of the things that aren't always the funnest to do.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, if I could just like sit there and create the world and then never look at it again and put it through some magical machine that made it perfect from there, like that'd be great. But like,
Yeah.
all part of it. Like, you've got to put in that time. Like, you have to do the rereads, you have to do the revisions, and like, very hard sometimes, but like the ending is worth it. So yeah,
Yeah. Well, even putting it through a magical machine, I feel like that takes away some of your decisions in the
yeah.
world.
Oh, 100%. Yeah,
Yeah,
100%.
yeah. Yeah, and, like, I'm thinking, like, if I were to send it to an editor and I was just, like, accepting whatever they send back, like, there's so many tweaks, there's so many things I'll reject, or I'll be like, "No, actually, I meant this," if they point out something that they think I was saying something different. And there's an aspect of like writing a story, and we know the background and we know like what the story is supposed to be in that area, but we're not portraying it that way. That's where like the critiquing comes in is so valuable, is because our authors or our readers aren't going to know what we're thinking, what we're trying to portray. We have to be very um, precise with what we're showing.
Yeah, for sure. Or like where it's going, right? Like, I love to like, I love like with Harry Potter, for example, like when you go back and reread it, like you pick up on stuff you didn't catch the first time through. And so I really try to do stuff like that. Like, I feel like my first book has so many little breadcrumbs in it. There's things that like I know people are going to miss the first time, but I know where I'm going with it. And like, there's a reason why I'm mentioning this, or like why this is brought up. And so I'm excited just for people to see as the series unfolds, like, oh, when they go back and read book one, they'll be like, I didn't even realize that. Wow, we connected that 4 books later. Like, that's amazing. So like that kind of thing.
I'm the same way. Like when I get feedback from my readers and they have an idea of what this meaning is or whatever this thing is, I'm like, I think fan theories is probably going to be my favorite thing to
Oh
read if I make it
yeah, it's
big of
so
like
fun.
what they think is going to happen.
Yeah. So like, for example, I have a character in my book who like, I'm intentionally like making you think like there's a bunch of people that it could be, because there's like kind of like a masked character or whatever. And like, I actually did in one of my email newsletters, I sent out like for like the respond, like win a prize or whatever. I was like, hey, respond with who you think the masked character is. And I got so many different responses to it. I'm like, perfect. That's what I'm going for. Like, I want there to be confusion. Like, well, it could be this person, it could be this person. And like, that reveal is not going to happen for a while. So like, hey, readers, like, sorry, buckle up. Like, it's going to be a few books before you know. But like, that's what I'm trying to do, is like leave them to like, okay, could it be this person? Could it be this person? And like, I'm so excited that like, and like, I'd be so bummed, right, if like everyone was responding with the correct answer, like, oh great, I'm being too obvious. But the fact that
I
like
need to go
literally like I
change
don't,
stuff.
yeah, like I barely had any like duplicates. It was all like people like guessing like different people, and I was like, oh sweet, this is really what I'm looking for. So
And that feedback is so important. That way okay, I'm hitting the way I'm supposed to be hitting.
yeah, 100%.
That's awesome. So with Shadowcasters, it's the theme of it is about approaching life in conflict with understanding, correct?
Yeah. So like, I'd say like, so the really one of the big things I've come up with for Shadowcasters is this idea of balance. Like, Shadowcasters, they want to bring about peace and balance, and like they talk a lot about compromise. And what I love about that is like there's a part where Master Toshio, who's kind of like the Yoda figure of the series, so to speak, like he's old, he's wise, like he's seen a lot, you know what I mean? And he kind of talks to them about how like, shadows are so unique because a shadow itself is darkness, but a shadow also can't exist without light. So it's the perfect middle ground. It's the perfect balance between those two worlds. And he talks about like, mankind has this misconception that, light is synonymous with good and darkness is synonymous with evil. But like, he talks about like nocturnal animals, like they thrive in the dark. That doesn't make them evil. It just makes them distinct. And so that's kind of this whole idea is like, yeah, they want to look at the world through balance. One of my big themes and one of my big messages and takeaways what people get from the book is just this idea of like, people are different, and it doesn't necessarily make them like evil or good, so to speak, but being willing to see things from other people's perspectives, willing to dive into people's shoes. And there's a conversation near the end of the book where I just love it. Like, I feel like it really like drives this point home. But one of the characters is talking about how like, look, even they're called anti-casters, that like, if you were in a vacuum, you might think, oh, they're the evilest of the evil. Like, they just want to kill all the casters or whatever. But he's even like, look, even some anti-casters in their heart of hearts, they probably think they're doing the right thing. And so as Shadowcasters, like yes, we need to preserve balance and do what's necessary to do that. but we also need to put ourselves in other shoes and see things from their perspective. And so that's something I've really leaned on. I feel like I've taken a lot from like my like personal life to like inject that into the book. Just this idea of like, putting ourselves in other people's shoes, never judging an individual by a collective or a collective by an individual, like things like that. And so those are things that I really, really tried to drive home in Shadowcasters. And I think you'll see a lot of that as the series goes on.
That makes that makes it to where that story is going to be timeless, because no matter what, throughout history, throughout time, there's always going to be the balance of like understanding where other people are coming from. They're doing what they think is truly best, like most of the time. You have your one-off evil guys who are just evil, but
Yeah.
most of the time, like that's one of the things I love. I don't know if you've ever watched Naruto, but Naruto goes into a lot of the backstory of the bad guys, and you see why they're doing what they're doing. And then suddenly you're like, why am I rooting for this bad guy?
Uh, oh my gosh, I love when you bring that up because like to me, like I love a villain that you're like, you know what? I get it. Like, you kind of have like a little bit of like maybe not rooting for them, but you're like, I like this villain. And like one example that comes to mind is I talked about Timothy Zahn earlier, and he created a character again. He writes a lot of Star Wars books, but his name is Grand Admiral Thrawn. And like Thrawn is just so cool because like he is so smart and so cunning that like you find yourself cheering for him. Like even though you're like, man, he's with the Empire, like I shouldn't be cheering for him, but he's so cool. And then especially now, Zahn has expanded and he's done like backstory books about Thrawn, like before he was even what you would classify a bad guy, like back when he was just like a normal dude, so to speak. And it's like now that I know his backstory, like I like him even more. Like don't make me
Yeah.
like keep cheering for him, but like
Yeah.
with my villains too, like I try to make them like I feel like a villain that's just like evil just because is really boring. Like that's just like
Hmm.
okay, it's kind of just like kind of a cliche and kind of lame. So like I feel like with the villains in my book, then like it's hard, right? Like not every villain will be perfect, but like I've tried to make almost every one where it's like, you know what, if you peel back the layers, like you'll understand why they're this way. And with some of them, like my hope, especially one in particular I'm thinking of right now, I don't want to spoil it, but there's one that I hope people actually kind of start cheering for because like, they deserve to have that, so to speak.
Yeah. 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 I love the villains who I'm like, I just wish somebody had loved them the way they needed. Like, right?
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
that's essentially it. We're not
Yeah.
necessarily hoping that their big bad plan goes through, but we're just like, man, why that sucks that they weren't loved the way they needed.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And it's like, you feel like sometimes like, yeah, you don't want their plan to succeed because obviously somewhere along the way they've gotten misguided. But you also like, I feel like you want to feel a little bit of sympathy or empathy towards the bad guys where it's like, like you shouldn't be doing this, but like, I get why you're hurting. I get why you're in pain. And so I'll kind of pull back the curtain a little bit. One element of Shadowcasters that I feel like is really unique and I'm really excited about it is every single one of my books is going to start with a prequel that's told through one of the main villain's eyes. And that's how his backstory is unfolded. So like the rest of the book is not told through his point of view. Anytime we interact with him, it's other characters that are dealing with him. But these brief little kind of snappy prologues are going to be how we peel back the layers of his backstory. And so like it's kind of interesting because like in the first book, like you see him just like heartbroken. And in the second book, you see a little bit more of like, oh man, like no wonder he, hates these Shadowcasters so much. So it's going to give you all like the series Shadowcasters is all about perspectives, right? And seeing the world through other people's eyes. So I'm like literally giving the reader a chance to see the world through this kind of main bad guy's eyes. And like, I have so many cool things planned for him. And he's kind of just in the background in the first two books. But I'm actually right now, Randy, since I'm done with book two, I'm just waiting for it to be like kind of finalized and by my editor. I'm starting on book three, and book three is where this main villain really starts to pick up momentum. And I'm just like giddy with excitement. I'm like, you've been patient. You've seen some of his backstories. Like he's going to start coming on full force now and it's going to be awesome. So yeah,
I
I can't.
love that. That gives you so a lot of the book series, like the first one is typically their favorite. It takes a real good craft to have another book in the series be their favorite. Like I'm thinking like Harry Potter. It's not the first book that's my favorite. It's like I
Yeah.
think the sixth or seventh book is my
Yeah.
favorite.
I
So
love it.
I yeah, and I think being able to do that as an author to where you're like, okay, this is the moment we've been waiting for, that shows some real skill for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Like honestly, like I feel like I beat myself up the most about the first book, for a couple of reasons. Like one is because like I feel like just every day I'm becoming a better writer. I'm like, man, if I had done this with what I know now, it might be even better. But like also like the first book is like there's just so much like getting the reader into the world, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to lose anybody. Like I just hope like the world is really cool. Like just trust me. Because I feel like once we get to books 2, 3, and onward, like it's just so much faster paced. Like you're in the world, you understand how the magic works. and now we can just focus on, exciting scenes. So that's really the goal I'm looking for.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I feel you on that. Like, just trust us. Let's get the info dumping out of the way, and I hope that it was as minimal as possible, and you understand the world you're walking into, because that's necessary. Like, I know so
It
many
is.
readers are like bummed, but you think about some of the biggest fantasy books that you have ever read. The first half of the book typically is just very world building, very building stuff up, and it's hard to consume.
Yeah. Well, and like too though, like I feel like a lot of times though, it's almost like, you know, on the flip side of that, like when a world isn't well built and it does like rush into the action too much, like I don't like reading a book where I'm confused. Like I would
Mhm.
rather it be a little bit slower to where I'm like, okay, I get a grasp, I understand the characters. Like that's one of the hard as a reader, that's one of my biggest like, turn off, so to speak, about a book is like if I'm just confused and I'm not following the characters, I'm not following like what's actually happening, I struggle with that. So like that's where like although on the flip side of that, I feel like that's where my weakness manifests sometimes. Is it like I've even been told by my editor and others, like sometimes I don't trust my readers enough. Like I try to tell them too much. Like that's something
Mhm.
I've been trying to really get good at is like I don't want my reader confused, but I don't want them like, ugh, like stop telling me this. So like finding that perfect balance in between is what I really strive for.
Awesome.
But
So,
yeah.
what is something as your readers consume book one and even maybe book two? What are you hoping they kind of take away from it?
Yeah. I mentioned this a little bit before, but like a lot of the editors and people I've spoken to have said like, oh yeah, this series is cool because like it's familiar enough, but also it's distinct enough. There's really nothing else out there with this same magic system. And so they've been really excited about that. So that's what I really hope is one takeaway is that it's like, oh wow, yeah, this Shadowcasters is like a really unique, fun, exciting concept that we hadn't thought of before. And like I am involved in like some different youth groups and things like that. And like I remember I told one kid about my book, and then like the whole rest of the time in this little class we were doing, he kept forming his hands into shapes, like pretending like they were shadow symbols. Like, yes, like that's what I want it to stick to. Like, I want people to be excited about that. So that's kind of the fun side. I'd say the more like serious takeaway is like what we talked about before. Like, I hope people will look at it as like, wow, like there's a really profound lesson to be learned here about putting myself in other people's shoes, like walking a mile in their shoes, really seeking to see the world from others' perspectives. Cause like, I love that, like, the Shadowcasters are meant to like preserve balance, but like they're not perfect. Like they mess up too. Like that's the thing too. It's not just like, oh, Shadowcasters, they should be given the benefit of the doubt. It's like, no, literally everyone deserves a chance to be seen from their perspective. They deserve a second chance. Like we all mess up. And like, those are really kind of the deep things that I try to explore in Shadowcasters.
So, are Shadowcasters kind of like Jedi in this, like where they're the level that everyone kind of looks to them to keep the peace, to kind of keep everyone protected?
Yeah. So to give a little context there. So for like my series, like for Generations, yeah, Shadowcasters were, you could say like pretty comparable to like Jedi's. Like they were the keepers of peace, they're the keepers of harmony and balance. What's unique about mine is, kind of like, in Star Wars, there's like Order 66 or whatever. In Shadowcasters, there was they called it the Shadowcaster Purge, where shadowcasting was deemed illegal. And so they either were killed off or had to go into hiding. But then without the Shadowcasters, the world fell into ruin and fell into disarray. So then my series, so Journey to Torsha, that's the first book. It actually takes place about 30 years after Shadowcasters are reinstated. And so it's a really unique time. Like if you looked at the history of this world where it takes place, because it follows these three teenagers that they're young enough that they've only known a world where like shadowcasting is legal and they can do it. But with it being re-legalized, it also came with like a ton of really, kind of strange compromises where before like shadowcasters led their own order. Now, like they have to report any new shadow creatures they learn. There's a lot of like strict rules and like permits that they can only like cast in certain places. So it's like, yes, they have freedom and it's legal and they don't have to be in hiding anymore. But also like there's a lot of like rules and laws that like you can only use your casting in certain ways. So like there's kind of this sentiment of like some people like they hated the world without casters because there was so much turmoil. So they're glad they're back. Others are still bitter and prejudiced against them and hate them and want them gone. Some casters are just accepted like, oh, this is the way the world is now. It's great. Others like that, especially like the older ones, like miss when they had their autonomy and could just cast the way they wanted to. And so like I just
That's
love it because like
so cool.
yeah, it's so complex. Like, and then of course there's they're called rogue casters that just, kind of say like, forget the rules, like we're gonna cast the way we want to. And of course they make the other shadow casters look bad, so to speak. And so there's all these different like weaved in perspectives and thoughts about it all. So yeah, that's kind of
That's
the
so cool.
situation there. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That sounds, yep. Okay, so you have, tell us again the name of your first book and then the name of your second book that's coming out in next month, correct?
Yep. Yeah. March 31st is the official pre-order date on Amazon. So, yep. The first book is called Journey to Torsha. The second book is called Defense of Huokiana. And people kind of like, I hope you have a pronunciation guide. And I do. It's on my website. So I kind of go with some weird pronunciations. My editor kind of reassured me that it makes the world more authentic to have kind of some words and sometimes some things that are a bit more challenging. So I'm excited about it. But yeah, so it's kind of funny, Randy. Like when I first planned Shadowcasters, like when I had that epiphany, years back, I thought I kind of planned out like a trilogy. Like, oh, I think it'll be 3 books. I think these will fit really, really nicely. Well, it's expanded so much more that like I'm not even close to done with what I thought was going to be book 1 of the so-called trilogy. But I am essentially splitting it up into 3 arcs. So the first arc is going to be 4 books long, and then there will be 2 more arcs after that. Right now, I have about 10 books planned. So I think the whole Shadowcaster series will be 10 books. There could be some like combining or splitting if things get too short or too long, but that's the vision right now. But yeah, so right now in this first arc, so to speak, the main characters, their names are Kaito, Sumi, and Nigel. They receive what's called their first commission. That's kind of like a rite of passage for newly appointed shadowcasting officers. And so the whole first arc kind of follows them on their first commission. So the first book is they have to go through trials to become officers, and then they leave on this like big journey. And then the second book is a continuation of that first mission that they're on. And what's cool about the second book is they have to take kind of an unexpected detour, and it takes them to this town where the town is like in super grave danger, and the Shadowcasters know they can help, but this town also doesn't like Shadowcasters and doesn't really want them. So it's all about them. Like, they have to navigate, like, how do we help this town? Like, are they going to just like turn us into the bad guys anyway? Like, so yeah, that's kind of the premise of this second one. And it's all building towards, there's something mysterious taking place at a town called Sardon City. And we know the bad guys are doing something. The reader knows the bad guys are doing something there, but the main characters don't really know. They're just kind of something like suspicious. So it's all building towards the final book in the first arc will be when they finally get to Sardon, and then things happen there. So
Yeah, that's so exciting.
yeah.
Now, you have prequel books. Are they smaller? Are they just kind of like getting you more immersed into the world?
Yeah, good question. So I've written one prequel short story. That's the one. It's called Devotion's Dawn. And this was one that was not on my radar. It was not planned. But as I have been getting book 1 like published and everything, or when I was getting book 1 published, I started working with a publishing consultant, and he suggested like, hey, one thing you really want to do is like build out a mailing list or a reader list so that you can send out newsletters, get people to join it. And a really cool tactic you can do for that is to write like a short story that you give to people for free if they join your mailing list. And so I got to brainstorming, and I came up with this prequel idea for that. And again, like, I just love it because it's like so pure. It's like after I feel like I've gotten better as a writer, and it went from blank pages to this story, and I call it a short story, but like it's a decent read. It's 180 pages, I want to say. And it takes place about 45 years before the main Shadowcaster story takes place, or about 40 years, I should say. And yeah, I just love it because it explores a totally different time frame. And whereas the main Shadowcaster series is mainly told from the perspective of the Shadowcasters, like Kaito, Sumi, Nigel, and then most of the side main characters are casters as well, I would say. The prequel story is actually told through the eyes of a character that can't cast. In my book, those that can't cast, kind of like there's Muggles in Harry Potter. In Shadowcasters, they're called Lone Realmians because they can only interact with one lone realm, because there's the tangible realm and the shadow realm. So those that can't cast are called Lone Realmians. So anyway, the prequel story is told from the perspective of a Lone Realmian who was born during the Shadowcaster Purge. And so he's never even seen a Shadowcaster. He thinks they're just almost like a myth. And so that whole premise of that one, it's just like a cool perspective. And then, yeah, the point of that one, Randy, is like, it is meant to be like, whether you've read book 1 and book 2, or whether you're brand new to Shadowcasters, it serves as like a standalone, that it either complements the main series, or you can just read it on its own with no prior knowledge, and it should still make sense if I've done a good job. But the thing I love about it too is it is just so full of Easter eggs. Like, if you're reading it, you're going to see little things that connect to the main series, especially as the series goes on. You're like, oh my gosh, that's that character, like things like that. So yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I experienced something similar, but a little bit different. I wrote my first book, and then I was working on my second book, and I realized that there was something missing. There was the history side of it that I needed to tell, that there was a prequel book. And so I had to just stop everything and go and write the prequel book, because it was like just glaring in my face that this needed to be done. So I'm glad that you were able to see that too, that like there's so much value in the prequels of like making the worlds more immersive.
Yeah. And I even toyed with, like, trust me, this is like probably over 10 years down the road if I survive to it. But like I've toyed with like, man, if Shadowcasters takes off and I get this whole main, 10-book series, well, I don't want to say if, when, I'm going to do it one way or another. When I get this
Yeah.
10-book series done, I think it'd be so cool to actually explore another series that would essentially be a prequel series, because there's just
Yeah.
so much you could explore. And like Master Toshio, who's one of the main characters in my main series, who was born and he was a prominent Shadowcaster before the Purge, like just exploring his younger life. And he's super close friends with the Lone Realmian Prime Minister, who was the one responsible for like re-legalizing shadowcasting. And I just like, as I've thought about it, I'm like, I would love to explore that story more. I just don't know how it's going to fit in this main Shadowcaster series. But like exploring, like, how did this caster and this Lone Realman become such great friends that through the Purge, like this, his name is Lorenzis, Malvis Lorenzis. How did Lorenzis decide to like stick by casters throughout all that time to then bring them back? Like there's, what I mean? There's just so many cool things I could
Yeah.
explore in a prequel series. So like that would be the hope, is like if Shadowcasters gets to where I can, write more permanently, I'd love to explore a prequel series. I also have had this sci-fi series that's totally separate from Shadowcasters bouncing around in my head for like years now. Like, I want to dive into that one too.
Wait, I will outline it and then just leave it. That way, if I
Yeah,
ever want to come back to it, I can. But I'm so afraid, like, because I have these stories come up, things will inspire me, things will happen, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's such a good story. And then I'm like, what if I forget it? What if I forget what I? So I will like, I have like my outlines
everything
for
down
everything.
too.
Yeah,
Yep,
yeah.
I'm the same way. So maybe, if Shadowcaster takes off here in the next few years and I can write more, I can just pump out even more books. I have a lot planned. So
I've got high hopes for you, Jared. I'm right there with you.
thank
Let's
you.
do this
Yeah,
thing.
let's do it together. Yeah.
Yeah. Where can we find book one, and then get where can readers follow you on social media to get excited as book two comes out?
For sure. Yeah. So book one is available on Amazon. It's available at barnesandnoble.com. It's also, there's a few other places that my distributor gets it too. So like I know it's like on walmart.com and kind of some other random places. Book two, I'm following the same path, so it should be the same places. Book two, Defense of Huokiana, it is available for pre-order on Amazon right now. So the release date for that one is March 31st. And so right now, yeah, Amazon's the only place you can do the pre-order, but it as well will be available on Amazon. It should be available on Barnes and Noble and other places as well there. So yeah. And then as far as social media goes, I do have like my own Shadowcaster social media. I've really tried to keep kind of my personal and my book writing accounts separately, for better, for worse. But yeah, so Instagram and Facebook, that is just at Shadowcasters series. And then my TikTok one's a little simpler. It's at Shadowcasters. That one was available on TikTok, which I was stoked about. Yeah, it's funny. Like TikTok, I feel like I am so out of place. Like I'm still trying to navigate how to best use it. I don't know exactly what I'm doing, but got some good comments and stuff on there, and some posts that have been okay. So yeah, that's where I'm at with those.
Yeah, TikTok is a whole other that's a whole other magic realm that we are still learning how to do the casting of the spells in that realm, because
Yep,
I'm
yeah,
I'm pretty sure it's either magic or luck.
yeah, 100%.
All right, Jared, you were amazing. This is good. I've got your books on my TBR now because I
Awesome. I'm so
love I
excited.
love books that give you a sense of like challenging your perspective, right? Or like even just furthering your belief in something, your standpoint on something. I've only ever read another really good book series that did that was Mistborn series by Brandon
Nice.
Sanderson,
Yeah,
and it
yeah.
it really challenged the way that I look at like leadership. And so your book's on my list.
Oh my gosh, thanks so much. Yeah, and like for any listeners out there too, like if you're like, oh, this sounds intriguing, but I don't love to dive into a series before it's done, or like things like that, like I totally get it. I would say at least give that prequel short story a shot, Devotion's Dawn. Everyone that I've talked to has been like, yeah, it's a page turner. It's a really fast read. It'll give you a great sense of my writing style and give you a sense of like what the Shadowcasters universe is like. Kind of at least before the new government is put up, but like still give you a sense of, the world building and things like that. But yeah, it's a great place to start. Or I personally think it's a great one to read after book one and two also, because that's the order I wrote it in. And so it has a lot of
A
connections to
little
those.
partial.
So yeah. But anyway, yeah, no, I love to hear that. I hope that I know that TPRs can be super long, as mine is too. But
Yeah.
when you get a chance to get to them, I'd love to hear your feedback too.
Yes, for sure. And I'm trying to maybe look into doing this a little more. If I read books from people I've had on here, I'd love to have you back to talk about the book specifically.
Yeah, I would absolutely love to. That would be cool. Actually, random side note, I had a really cool opportunity that one of my good friends from high school that we've like kept in touch over the years, maybe not as close as like we both wish we would have, but he was like, hey, like I'm in a book club and I chose your book for the book club. And so they read my book for the book club and I got to jump on their book club meeting with them and talk to them all. And it was quite a few people I hadn't talked to in years and years, but it felt like it was just yesterday that we were all friends in high school. So it was really cool to talk to them and get their, like, they were very honest with me about like both likes and dislikes about the book. And it was great. Like, it was awesome to talk to them about it. So yeah, I'd love to come back on and talk through it with you.
Yay, I love that, Jared. That's awesome. That's an exciting piece for people whenever it's like, okay, we're going to a book club. We get to talk to people who've read my books and especially people who like are from your past and now they see what you're doing now. That's so exciting.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. This was such a fun and just inspiring conversation of all of the details that goes into writing. Because I'm, fantasy authors. You guys have a special place in my heart because I'm fantasy too. So, like the deep world building is so much fun.
Yeah. Yep, I
All
agree.
right.
And yeah, thanks so much for having me on too.
Yeah, of course. All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening. Please, please go and follow Jared. Make sure you check out his books. Let him know what you think. Leave him reviews. And as always, a gentle reminder you do not have to always leave us the big long reviews that are very detailed, even just the 5-star, 4-star, whatever you want to leave, hit that. And, we know that your review list is probably enormous. So that helps authors immensely if you just give us some reviews. All right. We'll see you guys on the next episode of L3.
Hey guys, thanks for joining us on this episode of Lemon's Listening Library. Remember, every story has a journey, and every journey deserves to be heard. Keep reading, keep writing, and keep listening.